For example, you'll see a magnificent original by Leonardo da Vinci, 1476.
Really? I'll take it.
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
Well, hello there, friends. Welcome back to Art 101 with me, Mr. Burgher, professional artist, master educator, attempting to bring you the best in art historical content. I appreciate any interactions that you have with the video. Thank you.
Alrighty, Roo.
So today I want to talk a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci, an artist whose name is synonymous with art and science and innovation, and because his name is so known, because we can recognize his name and identify it so quickly and easily, sometimes it's things like that we really don't know a lot of the details of. So today I'm going to dive into some of the details of his life and give you a little bit better, more well-rounded idea of who Leonardo da Vinci was as an artist and a scientist and as a man. Leonardo da Vinci was trained in many areas and felt that artists should be the most educated people anywhere. This belief was largely because he felt that artists would come into contact with so many different areas and so many different things in the world that they must understand how everything works in order to depict it properly. Leonardo himself was trained in painting, sculpture, botany, ornithology, engineering, cosmology, anatomy, geology, physics, architecture, city planning, and music. His explorations of nature and anatomy began at a very young age. It is said that he understood gravity before Newton, explained the twinkling of the stars before Kepler, and invented a telescope before Galileo. It is believed that Leonardo wanted to be a doctor, however, it was not possible at that time because he was illegitimately conceived, and so the so-called noble professions were off limits to him, as they were also off limits to gravediggers, priests, and criminals. He was not even allowed to attend a university, so he would independently study, and thus his beliefs in the knowledge of an artist were really rooted in who he really was and what he could do. The handful of artworks that remain of Leonardo's are some of the most recognized in the world. However, every artist needs a start and they need good training. Leonardo's skills were helped first develop under Andrea de Cione, who was an early Italian Renaissance sculptor who had a part in training many of the Renaissance sculptors and artists. Now, de Cione was a Florentine artist and was a one-man art university. Now, Leonardo's first known work was created on August the 5th, 1473, when he was 21 years old. Now, in somewhat typical Leonardo fashion, he was a hard worker when he wanted to be, but he believed in exercising moderation, even when it came to study. He once said, "Avoid excessive study. It will give rise to a work destined to die with the workman." Leonardo himself was a very passive man. In his youth, they say he was quite handsome. He was very charming, somewhat charismatic, a bit careless with money, pretty respected employer. He employed many artists, musicians, and jesters to keep him entertained, and he had amassed quite a bit of wealth through the various projects that he actually completed. Truth be told, it was a struggle for him to complete his work, and many believe that he would have had a diagnosis of ADHD or dyslexia, obviously well before those things were ever in existence, but he definitely displayed those traits. He was also very well known as a generous, athletic, well-spoken, and funny man. Although he would complete many projects that were of a Christian theme, he saw Christianity and religion in general as a superstition the majority of his life. He was rarely personally attached to his artworks like many artists are, including myself. However, one exception to that is the Mona Lisa. Originally titled The Cheerful Woman, and in Europe still known as The Joking One, Leonardo put quite a bit of work and effort into making her as perfect as he could, and actually carried it around with him the majority of his life. It is said that the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, hired him to paint his mistress, Cecilia Gallerani, but the painting was never delivered. The work was eventually sold to King Francis I of France, which is why it is currently in Paris today. Anyway, it would pass down the royal line and eventually find its way to Napoleon Bonaparte's ownership. He would hang it in his bedroom, and they say that he loved the painting so much that he would kiss it every night before going to bed and first thing every morning. Without question, Mona Lisa is the most recognized artwork in the world. Now, many have asked, why is she so famous? And I've been to see the Mona Lisa, and it's really a kind of a small, unassuming painting, but it is just crazy popular.
She just goes a little mad sometimes.
Based on my research, here's what conclusions I've drawn. When it was first created, it was copied by other artists like Raphael Sanzio, and it has been continued to be copied over and over and over again. It has been parodied over and over and over again. And Mona Lisa has been used for product after product after product to sell the product. This relatively small painting on a wood plank has been recreated so many times it's really ingrained in our popular culture. It was influential from the get-go, and that snowballed into what it is today. Now, along that path, the work was stolen in 1911. This very much thrust the painting into the media and into popular culture. And that's why I believe it is such a popular painting today, because of its long, hundreds of year history of its snowballing into more and more of the high marquee paintings of the world.
How do you want me to pose?
Anyway, it's fine. I can't miss you.
He would keep a notebook of many of his ideas and inventions throughout his life. These notebooks would reveal a spirit of scientific inquiry and mechanical inventiveness that were centuries ahead of his time. Very few of these inventions were actually created. Because he was not allowed to attend the university, he would study independently. He would create advanced anatomical model parts to better understand the inner workings of the human body and various other things. For example, he made a human heart model to understand how the blood would flow and pump through it. And he was the first person to understand the movement of this blood. But these findings were suppressed by the church that thought that this was kind of a hedonistic exercise. And they felt that humans had no part in playing God. This was several hundred years before modern medicine would catch up to his understandings.
How embarrassing. How embarrassing.
Arguably the most famous painting that he ever would create was The Last Supper, and this depiction would completely reshape how the world would create Last Suppers forever after. This painting is of a formal balance. His overarching concept was to depict this exact moment. And this would change the depictions of the Last Supper, because every Last Supper, basically after this point, would depict this exact same moment as well. This is the moment when Jesus reveals that one of his disciples would betray him, as noted in Luke 22:21. And Leonardo wants to give us clues as to who the individual is. And so we notice that Judas is the only disciple with a shadow. We notice that his head is the lowest in the line of disciples. And the major clue is that he is also reaching for the dish that Jesus is reaching out to. And this would create another trend that the vast majority of individuals depicting this Last Supper would also depict. Now, before this time, Judas was typically depicted on the other side of the table, as to segregate him from the others. But Da Vinci changes that. He places them all on one side of the table, again changing a trend in art history. Now, in terms of the work, Leonardo worked crazy slow on this project, taking time that very much angered the church that was paying him on the commission. The prior of the church reported back to the others that Leonardo would enter in the morning, looking around for about half an hour, placing a few brush strokes on the wall, and call it a day's work. He would spend a year trying to find a face model for Judas. This very much frustrated the prior, and he was pushing that on Leonardo. So Leonardo basically gave him an ultimatum. Either allow him the time to find the face for Judas, or he would use the likeness of the prior as the face of Judas and finish the work right now. So he was allowed all the time that he wanted. This work, extremely well known in the modern world, has risen into popularity and in modern context has even exploded in popularity after Dan Brown's release of his novel The Da Vinci Code. Fact, fiction, I don't know. Regardless of your take on the things in the book that are presented as true, the important thing is that we're looking, examining, analyzing the works of art that might not have happened without a prompting by this novel.
Oh boy, was that a mistake.
Always attempting new things, Da Vinci was painting with a newly invented fresco media that was plaster and oil based. And this was the first test of that paint, and that test absolutely failed. As a matter of fact, it so much didn't work that the painting was literally peeling off in his own lifetime, and he had to come back to retouch the work several times. Modern restoration of this painting began in the 1970s and was finished in 1997. It has been retouched so many times that absolutely none of this work was actually painted by the hand of Leonardo himself. Now, deterioration of the work was not the only problem with it. It was also nearly destroyed on August 16, 1943, when an air raid by the United States almost destroyed the monastery where this painting is, and you can see a little bit more about that story in my Art 101 on the Monuments Men. Leonardo would spend quite a bit of time at the tail end of his life organizing his notebooks and papers that were left in the care of his apprentice and lover, Salai. Soon after his death, these notebooks were given to different people, they were cut up, they were lost, and even confiscated by leaders of the Catholic Church. Only about 1/5 of the work that was created in these notebooks survives today. Now, Salai himself was a unique story, and his name is a nickname meaning Little Satan. Now, when Leonardo took him in, he was only 10 years old, and Leonardo would call him a thievish, lying, obstinate, and greedy boy. And to be fair, he really never improved upon that observation, except in the mind of Leonardo, who really grew to love and care for him. Now, Salai would develop some skill in order to paint from his master Leonardo, but he did not grow to any sort of historical relevance. Leonardo would support him for 25 years and give half of his vineyard to him, as well as entrust him with his notebooks and estate after his passing. And Salai appears to have died a year after Leonardo, presumably from a gunshot wound. And this leads us to kind of think about his personal life. There's a lot of speculation on Leonardo's sexual orientation, and yes, it is true that he was a somewhat closeted gay man. At that time, there were certain homosexual acts that were actually punishable by law, and he actually went to jail for some of those acts. And that really pushed him to be very much a closeted person throughout much of his life, although, again, he would very much accept the company of certain individuals, Salai being the most prominent and final individual that he would spend his personal time with. Although his name is very much synonymous with art and art making, only 8 major artworks by Leonardo da Vinci survive today that we can attribute to him. Although these great works of his live on today, he would pass away at the age of 67. I tell you, I love that story. Thanks for watching.